it's my pleasure to invite Reverend Sue Miller-Born to the podium for today's lesson about creativity.
Well, good morning again. Is mic working? So I want to honor the Father. The Father, as we think of that idea, this day dedicated to honoring that energy of the Father. So let us not move past this moment as we close our eyes and remember our own personal Father and the greater Father, recognizing that moment of tenderness, of being held, of being embraced. Imagine whatever age that is for you, wherever that idea takes you, let yourself be held by the Father, by that power, by that wisdom, by that intellect and knowing, that moment of love before you ever were confused, before there was any judgment about the type of Father. Just a moment dwelling with great respect and reverence for the energy, the archetype even of Father itself. And as we breathe into that remembrance, our hearts open and soften. And there's a sense of humility that enters our heart. And we say, thank you, God. Thank you, Father. And so it is. So I think it's interesting when Mother's Day, the church gets filled, and on Father's Day, there's a lot more space. Interesting. Interesting as we care for the Father. So those of you that are fathers, blessings to you. And today's talk is about the creative. You Are Creative is the title, and a new outlook towards that. And we've been working all month on this wonderful book from Ernest Holmes, A New Design for Living, one of the books that was inspired by him towards the end of his life. And I'm going to launch into this talk today, picking up from somewhere I left off last week on this particular quote from some of his writing. And he says, "At all times we are freely creating the life we live. The ability consciously and specifically to better our lives depends on the degree to which we are able to believe in our basic concept of the nature of life with faith. This faith must rest on both intellectual and emotional conviction." Very important piece there. The faith that we are developing in our lives rests on the intellectual and emotional conviction. Now, I share that with you because I'm going to read to you something that inspired me during the week. Kathy Rowell is a member of our center, and she sends me some of the most contemplative and deep passages or stories to read and to contemplate on. And so every time I get something from Kathy, I take it as a meditation because it's a story that really stirs me. And this particular one starts off, "Do you remember this lady?" And it's a tribute to Irena Sendler. And she died in 2008. She was 98 years old at the time of her passing. She died in Warsaw, Poland. Now, some of you, do any of you know her story? Do any of you know her? When somebody says, "Do you remember this lady?" I'm just curious. Irena Sendler. You will today. She was born, she was raised in Poland. So on May of 2008, when she passed at the age of 98 from pneumonia, she had often been referred to as the female Oskar Schindler in her native Poland for her daring and ingenuity in saving the lives of more than 2,500 Jews, most of them children, in the German-occupied Poland during World War II. Unlike Schindler, though, whose story was the subject of Schindler's List, which I think a lot of you are perhaps familiar with that, she was relatively an unknown figure to the world until 1999. And a group of 4 Kansas high school students put on a play that they wrote and created and performed called Life in a Jar, a play about Irina's life-saving efforts in the Warsaw Ghetto. So that's how the story starts off, and already I was deeply intrigued by this. And so the LA Times obituary talks about Irina, describes her as a Polish social worker. She had passed herself off as a nurse, though, to sneak supplies and aid into, and she also took children out of the Warsaw Ghetto, and the punishment she endured when she was finally caught by the Nazis. So her background is she studied at the Warsaw University and was a social worker in Warsaw when the German occupation of Poland began in 1939. So in 1940, after the Nazis had herded the Jews into the ghetto and built that wall that separated it from the rest of the city, disease, and especially typhoid, remember, became very rampant. But the social workers were not allowed to cross into that ghetto. But Schindler, she imagined the horror of life behind those walls, was able to obtain some fake identification and passed herself off as a nurse, which allowed her to then bring food, clothes, and medicine. So you might be wondering, well, how does this have to do with creativity? Please follow it and recognize the moments how we really constrict ourselves. That idea of Emerson, of that ever-flowing grace and power of we can all have this potential within us, but we kind of go, not me. We watch that river shrink. We watch ourselves get caught on a snag in the river of life. And so here's this person that recognized a calling, a deeper calling than what she was meant to be as a social worker. She was not defining herself. She opened it up. By 1942, when the deadly intentions of the Nazis had become clear, Schindler joined a Polish underground organization, and she recruited 10 close friends, a group that would eventually grow to 25. All but one of those were women. And they began rescuing these Jewish children. She and her friends smuggled these children out in boxes, suitcases, sacks, coffins, sedating babies to keep their cries quiet. Some were spirited away through a network of basements and secret passages. Operations were timed to a second. One of Schindler's children told of waiting by a gate in the darkness as a German soldier patrolled by. When the soldier passed, the boy counted to 30, then made a mad dash to the middle of the street, where a manhole cover opened and he was taken down into the sewers and eventually to safety. Can you imagine the intricacies, the tension around creating such complicated, intricate plans of saving the children? Most of the children who left with Schindler's group were taken into Roman Catholic convents, orphanages, and homes and given non-Jewish aliases. Schindler recorded their names, this is the beautiful part, on thin rolls of paper in the hope that she could reunite them with their families later. She preserved the precious scraps of jars and buried those jars in a friend's garden. In 1943, though, she was captured by the Nazis. She was tortured, but she refused to tell her captors who her co-conspirators were or where these sacred bottles were buried. And she resisted all the time in many other ways. She worked in the prison laundry, and she and her co-workers were known to make holes in the German soldiers' underwear. I know, how dare. But when they discovered, they got mad about this. It's kind of brutal how they took revenge. But she had a close call because they lined everybody up, and she survived that. I don't want to go into all of that because it's painful, and I want to leave you with a greater understanding, not with a painful story. But during one of her brutal torture sessions, her captors, and I can really relate to this, they broke her feet and legs and she passed out. When she woke up, a Gestapo officer told her he had accepted a bribe from her comrades in the resistance to help her escape. So that officer, what he eventually had done was put her name on a list that appeared to everyone that she had been executed. But so she was then sent into hiding, but she continued from that point on. She never stopped any of her efforts to rescue those people, 2,500 people. So she was added to the list to win, she was a Nobel Prize, trying to win that. It was never awarded to her, but the reason this email was going around was to offer that memoriam to her 65 years later, allowing a memory of all those who lost their lives during the Holocaust, and as a reminder that it's not a myth, that it's a horrific event in time, but the courage, the power, the creativity of a dedicated few that allowed many to survive and to move on and to have rich and full lives. I just think that story is so powerful because she refused to live small. She lived an example of being more than a limited idea of herself, despite all circumstances. Despite all circumstances. What was within her, she took moments to tap into that energy. And she had faith and conviction, and she trusted in that power that was surging in her as her. She entered what we call a greater degree of livingness. Ernest Holmes describes that there's states where the life will always be life, but you need to dare to stick your head out of the cave of morbid, depressed, and limited thinking and create a new world. And so this opportunity is so important for us to invest in the ideas as we look at our world today, and we see so many things that we feel are out of our control, are out of our hands, are happening in other parts of the world. But let us not contract our thinking. Let ourselves expand our thinking to embrace a greater idea of this current, this power, this willingness to live this attribute of truth. Not letting what we hear be that which contracts us to smallness, but allows us to live to our fullness. So these conditions that Ernest Holmes, this is so often the question in our teaching when we really get into the juice of our teaching and we're taking the classes and people say, well, what about the suffering? What about that suffering? And it is that condition, as Ernest Holmes says, they are real conditions out there. But we have an opportunity to take dominion. This is where Troward comes in and inspires us with his wisdom. Judge Troward was a very powerful teacher of Ernest Holmes. And he says we take that personal factor, we take dominion, and we take that sense of personal power, and we watch that we stand at a place recognizing these are the effects of some very cruel things going on in our world. But we take it higher, and we posture ourselves in such a way, and we listen for that still small voice that gives us the word, that gives us that opportunity, that beckons us to take action, to hold it in a higher place, to lift it into a place where we speak love and truth and grace and understanding, where we don't keep just stirring it into misery, but we take that and we drink it in and we transform it into something that is much more powerful. Ernest Holmes says the creative action is continuous. We but change our thought. Wonders can result if we can do this. Wonders can result. You see, you cannot deny in that moment when you say, but this is such big stuff happening in our world. Wonders can result if we but choose to do it. if we can come to believe we are living in God, we are living in God. We are of that essence. We are a conduit of that truth. That spark of the divine consciousness is just zeroed down into that place at the altar of our heart. If we listen to that stirring inside of our heart, we are propelled into action. We come to believe that we are living in God, and God is expressing himself through us. So this is what Irene felt. God is expressing through her. So it gave her the power to endure all sorts of torture. The torture was the effect. Her conviction was of truth. And in that conviction, she lived to 98 years old. And she allowed 2,500 plus people to live as well. So God expressing himself through us, and if we can apply this thought consciously to everything we do, and at last it will become an automatic action. Then we find ourselves on the road to greater freedom. We find ourselves on a road to greater freedom, joy, happiness, and living. We do that. We mirror that out into our world. Our world follows in our footsteps as we become leaders of a greater truth, a greater understanding. You see what an ambassador of truth you are? And if somebody said, do you remember this person? And perhaps there will be a moment in a sanctuary where he goes, no, but there's a story about you. There's a story written on the soul of this planet that says you have done great work. You have done great work. Don't come down. Keep operating from that level of absolute love. So this idea about the conditions being real, let me share with you what he says about this. They are real, solid, tangible facts. Yes, they are. We do not deny their reality. We acknowledge them all for what they appear to be to us. If we do not, we would be putting blinders over our eyes. So you see, it's not about living in a world of denial and little happy, little stickers all around just saying, nothing's not happening. No, we look deeply into the soul of suffering. We look deeply in such a way that we can put it at the altar of our heart and we can transform it into such a way that a greater good becomes real. So we do not put these blinders on, denying the validity of our senses and refusing to accept these processes of a reasoning mind. The world is real enough, but we face it, you see. We don't need to avoid it or kid ourselves about it. We accept it for what it is, but we don't stop there. Most people do. Most people stop there. Do you? I know I do sometimes. Sometimes things seem so overwhelming to me. Sometimes I have to change the channel, especially if it's a hungry child or an animal suffering. I can't do those commercials. And I go into this, I can feel myself contract. I can feel it. It's so visceral when I see those things that cause my eyes to want to close and shut out and say, that cannot be real, but it is real. So what do? I cannot stop there. But most people do. That's where we sit with a sense of complete helplessness and a fruitlessness of struggle. This we are not going to do any longer. I give you that charge as you leave here today. This we do not do any longer. We are beginning to know better. We know that there is a thought of some kind, an unseen spiritual cause that is and must be behind every effect, every appearance, every condition, good or bad. The condition will change as the thought or cause is changed. So what does that mean? That means we keep our eyes open and we look with this sense of pure eyes at all that we see, and we listen deeply to that stirring of the one. And we listen for that still small voice that says, you must do this. You must bless this situation. You must, offer this coin. You must offer this prayer. You must look deeply to see where you too are the cause. Has your thinking been so unattended to that if you just change the characters of the story, oh my goodness, I'm not really invested in that drama, but in my own personal life, I have done this as well. And this, I find, is my cause. And then we work on developing rich and profound and beautiful thoughts that uplift us into levels of blessings and love. He goes on to say, I'm sorry I'm reading a lot, but this word, I can't paraphrase this any more powerful than what Ernest Holmes has done. The best thing for us we could ever do is to gather together all the morbid, depressing, limiting ideas we have carefully nurtured in the pattern of our thinking, consume them in the fire of our newly established conviction and faith in the unity and goodness of life. You see, if we started to dwell upon the things with even here, a greater good is unfolding. Know with me now, a greater good is unfolding. And I charge this moment with great love, with great power, to be invested and to lift the suffering from whatever I am seeing before my eyes and in the altar of my heart. You see, that moment of offering the goodness back into life. Because the tendency is to shut the eyes and to shut and stop the sentence midway before we've offered that God-given knowing inside of ourselves to allow the greater good to be made manifest. These ideas we'll be getting rid of come from a feeling, conscious or unconscious, that we needed to be punished, which probably constitutes the greatest negation the human mind has ever entertained. You hear this all the time in our own personal life. When I point back to that, when there's a greater thing going on in the world, I'm looking at the balance that the world is trying to find right now in Mother Earth. When you watch the incredible firestorms and the hurricanes and the tornadoes and the floodings, and this is the elements of the earth working to restore to a greater good. And so we can see all that, and then we keep needing to pull back and look from a personal point of view. There was a lady, Charlie and I were looking up how to spell a certain reverend's name, and in that led to a brief answer question moment with this particular minister, and the woman was started to go on about her story, that she's been in the teaching ever since she was 14, and the minister goes, yeah, your question. I thought, oh, kind of pushy, and then the person said, well, I just feel that no matter how much I know this teaching, I've gotten over the tumors, I've gotten over this cancer, I've gotten over that, but I still feel that I need to be punished for something. And I thought to myself, I hear that too. I hear that where people, their self-worth is in the toilet. They need to recognize that it has been done. It has been done. Lift it up into that place where grace can carry it. It has been your story. Turn the page, as we talked about last week, and reinvent yourself now anew. And the minister's remark to her was, go back to Troward and look up the law of averages. And I'm sitting here going, yeah, go look up the law of averages. And I'm like, and when I actually did, and I want to read that to you because it's very potent in what he says about the law of averages and how you lift yourself out of those. So 2 words that he brings up, and I already mentioned one was that personal factor, but the law of averages. Because she says, you are dwelling in the law of averages, is what she told her client. And this is what Thomas Troward says: the evolutionary workings of cosmic intelligence without the conscious participation of the self-conscious individual. We subject ourselves to the law of averages where things happen to us. Or we can decide to transcend the law of average by taking dominion, using that personal factor, and then things happen through us. Amen. Yes, amen to that, because things are always going to be happening. Let them happen through you, not to you, not to contract you. You see that idea? Can you feel that with Emerson saying that river flowing through you? When you allow that current just to be open and you can feel God's grace just moving through you, all that happens to you, you're just carried by the current. Versus the victimness of it, where it's happened to me and you coil up and you become tense and you're slammed against the sides of the river. You're thrown against the rocks. And oh, you're suffering, but you deserve it because you need to be punished. And that is not the grace of God. That is not what this teaching is so invested in. It is asking us to take that place of absolute dominion, to recognize that we can live this life of great creativity, of great possibility, of great potential. So this idea of finding the security within yourself. There's no battle that's needed to deal with these outer effects or conditions. It's all turning your thinking inward. Being non-resistant towards the conditions. Think about that. Notice that in your weeks ahead. We don't destroy the condition, but we look deeply into the pathways of our thinking until we find the cause, our own personal cause, the greater cause at large. I was going through files this week and I ran across Reverend Dennis Merritt-Jones, an old workshop that he had done on prosperity, and it had these, and I'm getting ready to do a prosperity workshop. And this idea is so profound to me that we have this, and Mary talked about it at the very beginning of this month, about how much of this grace that we're allowing in to pour into our being. And this funnel, we can have this funnel above our head with just allowing this divine current to flow through us. And yet we can open. Can you see that open? As you open that current and you allow that current to not be so restricted to try to, gosh, I got to try to aim for that little narrow opening that she has for me. Can you imagine God up there with that dialogue? Open it up, girl. You know, and it's like, open it up. Open it up. Open up and allow that sense of grace, that pathway of knowing to open. There's a greater power in the universe, and it's longing to operate through you. Recognize as you open these funnels, this beautiful ending quotation from the reading of this creative act of the One. I am one with God, gets rid of fears and doubts. So if you can open up that aspect of yourself, know with me, I am one with God, getting rid of the fear and doubt. There is no confusion through intuition or through logical thinking. There is no confusion. I am open to that grace. I am not controlled by outer circumstances. Who, indeed, is driving my chariot? That is from the Bhagavad Gita. When Arjuna and Krishna are in that battle, it's this, it's that. You know, the duality is going to be there. Who are you going to allow to drive your soul? And there's where you turn and you anchor deeply into this grace, into this truth. There's always so much to share. Yesterday I was thinking, I got a paragraph here. I got a paragraph. And yet as I stand here, that paragraph opens me up to the world. And I see each one of you. I see each one of you as ambassadors. Our Reading community, we have a place, a divine call. And as we take that personal factor and as we take dominion, and we really sit ourselves in the driver's seat with the One steering the reins, we will make a difference in this world. We have that creative juice. We have a new outlook as we let go of judging every experience. So join with me in this moment as our funnels of truth, as the riverbeds flow, that we are anointed with the love, the grace, the truth, the profound power of God. And we don't skirt the issue. We don't let ourselves be small here as we accept that truth. Our humility is a humility that opens us even more. Our humility is framed with opportunity to let go of doubt and to trust in a faith and a conviction that a greater good is unfolding, and we are participating in that greater good by the means of the love and the power that are the God-given qualities pouring through us. So command my hands, open my heart, clear my mind, soften my belly, and allow myself to move as a spiritual warrior into the world, and allow my acts to be done with grace and good, with clarity and truth. I know this truth for myself, and I know this truth for each and every person sitting here this day, each and every person that hears these words. I release this with gratitude, knowing what it means to be a creative participant in this world of one. Thank you, God. And together we say, and so it is.